Hello and welcome to Art Show. I'm Craig Stover, and today I have with me Ann Reichlin. Hey, Ann, how are you?
I'm good, thank you.
I was really thrilled to be able to have you to come on the show, and there we go. I had a lot of fun selecting images of yours. Hold on for a second. Naturally, technical glitch. Um, Fantastic. Sorry about that. So, I wanted to start out with this was one of my favorites. I loved this image. I loved the concept of it. Um, am I looking at something that's a little bit older?
Yes, that is actually from 1998,
Okay.
but it is part of a 20-year-long series of interventions in Utica, New York.
Okay. Is is does this still exist to look like
No,
this?
no, the house site exists, and I have another piece on that site. But I was a resident at Sculpture Space in
Hmm.
Utica, and
Hmm.
I had long wanted to do a project in a house. I
Uh-huh.
was inspired by, Gordon Matta Clark, of course,
Hmm.
and a whole slew of fantastic architects, kind of untrained folk architects that had taken their rooms and their spaces and done, very kind of wonderful things with them. So I, for a long time, really wanted to do something with a house, and I applied to Sculpture Space. I had recently moved to Utica to teach at Hamilton College, which is quite near Utica, actually. And I approached Sculpture Space at that time, and there was at that time Utica was suffering a lot economically, and a lot of the houses in the area were just falling apart. There'd been a lot of population loss. A lot of the old factories had shut,
Hmm.
and the city of Utica offered to give this house. It didn't have the steel cutting through it at that time. The
Really?
house um, and the land next to it to Sculpture Space for a dollar.
Hmm.
And since they knew I was already accepted as a artist to be a resident there, they purchased that with the idea that they would eventually turn that house into either artist housing or an office space. Well, actually, that never happened. But this is what I did as part of my residency at Sculpture Space in 1998.
So when I came across this as an artist, the first thing that I thought of was how many ideas popped into your head about what to do with this space before you settled on this? Was it an
Uh,
immediate or
well, I work with models.
okay?
So I had done a series of models. And so I did, models and variations of the house. I'm not, and then what was really interesting about doing this in the context of an artist residency is there were artists around that give you really honest feedback in the process of working on things. So some of the
Oh,
ideas that I was working on at the time, I would have people come by and say, it's not really going to work as well as you think. So it benefited a lot from having feedback. The other thing, and I don't think you can really see it from this particular shot, but in that neighborhood at that time, a lot of it was a depopulating neighborhood.
uh-huh.
Um, and I wasn't really sure how the piece would come across to the neighborhood itself because it's a pretty aggressive thing to do to a
Yeah,
house.
yeah.
So what you can't see from this picture is I planted an entire field of cosmos. And so that it was sort of like an ambassador to the neighborhood. And
Mm-hmm.
so it became like something that people could stop and talk and, ask about it. And um, yeah, so while working on it, what's also not pictured here is I had, I put some little geraniums. I made some kind of window boxes, things to somehow soften the impact of
Uh-huh.
what
Uh-huh.
I was actually, what I was. And the other thing is my intention at the time was to do an inside of the house and an outside of the house. So I would cut through the house and then I would deal with the space inside the house.
Okay.
And that summer, I ran out of time and was only able to do this outside of the house. And what the other thing that you can't tell is it's up on a knoll, this
Mhm.
strange kind of knoll. And the other thing you can't tell is it's right on what would have been a spur of the old Erie Canal. So it was, there's an old railroad track nearby, and the part of the Erie Canal came right through there that was servicing the space that was sculpture space. So it has this really kind of interesting history. So this, because I'd really, really wanted to do the inside, and I didn't get a chance to do it in 1998, I approached Sculpture Space again in 2001, and I was no longer a resident artist because it's only a one-time thing. But I did do the interior of that house.
Hmm.
I don't know if you have that part of your things there, but that's on my website. If
Okay. So when you're doing something like this, which is completely different, right? You had mentioned something about earlier about being open to feedback from other artists or your constituents. Does that also play a role in something that looks very personal like this?
Not really, no.
Okay.
These are more process-based works. They're
Okay.
part after I worked really for many years on very large scale work, and
Right.
some of the work was more like almost like building like personal habitats.
Hmm.
But that is, I wanted to build bigger and more impactfully. I had to work more collaboratively with people, with architects, with engineers, with like people that were helping me build. And at a certain point, I really wanted, I love being in the studio and on my own and alone. And so
Okay.
these, so several years ago, I set out to embark on kind of see what would happen if the process wasn't, to see where the process itself would go,
Hmm.
and made a series of kind of more iterative um, works that had less, like when you're working on a piece like with a house, you have to show it to people, this is what I'm going to do, and people have to kind of decide whether they're going to let you do that.
Right.
And don't have that same kind of relationship to a viewer when you're making more personal work in the studio. So this
So
work really comes out of the process.
in the difference between the personal works and the public works, do you have a preference in terms of, just to put it simply, scale? Do you love working much larger, or is it just a different kind of a thing?
Well, I really love doing both.
Okay.
And it's something that I've struggled with a lot because from the time I was in graduate school, getting out, I did a lot of outside large pieces. And so I really kind of thought of myself as kind of working in that site-specific realm of work where you're either inside your work or your
Hmm.
work or the viewer comes inside your work, where it's really very physical, it's more spatial. And then when working in the studio, I'm actually my background, my undergraduate degree is in ceramics, which is an object-based
Mm.
field. And
Well,
I
that's good
actually want
information. I like that.
I mean, I actually love objects. I love
Uh-huh.
making things. And then there's this kind of dynamic where you think, wow, if it's big, somehow it's more meaningful. So how do you justify making this small thing? How do you have a
Right.
small thing that makes that impact? And what do you want to do in relationship to your body, in relationship to this, something that people can potentially hold? So yeah,
So,
it's something that I think a lot about, and it's something like an ongoing dialogue that I have with myself.
so speaking of dialogues that you have with yourself, one of the things that I notice about your works is I'm seeing a lot of secret geometry within your works.
Yeah.
Is that something that are you actively pursuing things like that? Or I know a lot of artists, they work with it so long that it's second nature. It just comes out in terms of the balance of the work.
Well, I would say it's both second nature, but also I would say that in my work, there are certain perpetual conflicts.
Mm,
And one of the conflicts is between a state of absolute abandon or chaos and control. And
hmm.
so there's always a dynamic, there's always a tension between the chaos and the control. And so the structures sort of, it's like are holding back that which is trying to escape. And
Mm,
so I love formal structure. And I
hmm.
love I mean, I love thinking about formal structure. So one of the inherent tensions that I've always felt with work when it's large is the contradiction between wanting to be in something and experience it, but then also to be able to make sense of it,
Mm.
like in terms of formal composition. And
Hmm.
I mean, I just enjoy thinking about that, and you need to think about it, and it structures the work, and it's also, you work on something, you work something in a space, and that, in a sense, forms the foundation for what you do
So,
next.
so when you're working on something like this, and I had a hard time choosing because you had a lot of wonderful drawings. Are these drawings an end unto themselves, or are these still part of a larger process? Do they turn into other things?
They are not concretely about, like, they're not a drawing for a project. They're not a model.
Right.
But they're core to the ideas themselves. I mean, they're their own they're their own entity, and what I love about drawing is it's so responsive.
Hmm.
You can put a mark down, it's a conversation, and you can change it, and you can erase it, and you can
Right.
make it and change it and go back and forth. And so at the end, it's sort of like you reach a certain peace with it. And it's a
Hmm.
very different state than working on a large scale project that you work on for like a year or for 2 years, where, you whereas a drawing, you can work on it for over a couple of afternoons, and
Hmm.
and then it has to still stand on its own. But I see it more, as I say, as a conversation.
I love coming across unexpected drawings like this, because when I first saw your work, I wasn't looking at drawings. I was looking at these site specific installations. This is kind of just a me question. Is there a computer in your studio that you use? It's
No.
it's all hand.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Oh, so sorry about that. Well, let's talk about this one. Speaking of site specific work, so I know that from this photo, I'm only seeing a piece of this.
Yeah.
Um, can you tell me just a little bit about this work? How did this
Yes,
come
this is an
about?
older piece. This is from 1988, actually.
Okay, all
It
right,
was part of Art on the Beach, the last season of Art on the Beach,
all right,
when it was no longer at Battery Park, and it was at Hunters Point. And it's kind of one of the things that kind of persists through all of my work is the idea of home,
yeah,
and not just like what is not a house, but what is a home, what is a place, what is what we inhabit, and that idea, the other thing that runs through my work is that idea of transformation and transience and impermanence. Those are
mm-hmm,
like it's a through line. So this is part of that body. And so when I applied for, as I responded to an artist's call,
mm-hmm,
and I wanted to make a piece that I would not complete, the idea that it would continue for the course of the summer. And it
mm-hmm,
was related to the prior work that I had done when I was living in Philadelphia, where I had made a piece that was completed, and then I showed it, and then I brought the piece, reconstructed it, and then smashed it up, and then built with its fragments. So I was
mm-hmm,
building with that fragment. So this piece grew out of that idea. So the idea was that I would build this world on this site, which was an old landfill, actually. And then after the opening, I would continue to work on the piece over the course of the summer.
mm-hmm,
And that's what I did. It was in 1988, which was an extremely hot summer. There were
mm-hmm,
I think about 8 other artists also on the knoll.
mm-hmm,
And it had a remarkable view of the over the East
mm-hmm,
River,
mm-hmm.
Manhattan. And so here I was with that material of what I was working on at that time, working with these fragile sticks, looking at
Uh-huh.
this remarkable cityscape. It's like, what do you even do about that? Like, how do you even, you
when
know,
I
up,
when I first came across this as an artist, the first thing I saw was that's a hell of a drawing, right? And it's
yeah,
interesting how you're talking about what you just said earlier about drawings that you can revisit and you change and you do all that kind of stuff. And that's exactly how I see this
well, it
particular
was
piece.
that. It was exactly that, because at this point, these were small. I mean, it was a pretty large piece in the sense it took up a lot of like real
Yeah,
estate,
yeah.
but it wasn't that tall. I was probably like 12 feet tall.
Okay.
and wired in, and it built piece by piece by piece. As I say, I was very inspired by folk architecture.
Mm.
And so I did not have a concrete plan. I wasn't required to have a concrete plan for this.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so I built it and treated it exactly like a drawing. And it
No
had the
plan is a plan. Yeah.
the plan is planned. I had the luxury of doing it because the scale and my mechanism for building it enabled me not to have to worry, well, if I put this out here, what if it falls on somebody? I really didn't have to worry about that. So I just kept building and building. It was all accumulative. I didn't edit. I just kept
Yeah.
building. The idea that it was like a force of life itself. But a funny story about this is that some folks, photographers, videographers reached out to me a couple years ago, and they were from that area, and they
Hmm.
didn't realize that the space had become overgrown with trees.
Hmm.
It was a barren knoll at that time, and
Hmm.
they were planning. They were reaching out to all the artists that had shown in that Art on the Beach show, and they were going to try to reconstruct through video what had existed. They treated it almost like a lost treasure. It
Hmm.
was
Hmm.
so interesting. It
That's
was like it
fantastic.
only took, like 25 years for the thing to be completely, for that history to
Yeah.
completely erased.
Fantastic. So I wanted to end on this piece because it is very different in its treatment. I imagine that this is not something that's being deconstructed all the time.
No.
Uh, but what I see in this is looking at your work, this is a newer, kind of newish piece.
Hmm.
And I'm seeing this, I don't know, I think maybe it's just the materials that are informing me that it's, more permanent idea or more of uh, not a complete idea, but it just looks more permanent. I guess that's the easiest way to say it.
If only. No, but this is the Munson Williams museum in Utica, and
Okay.
they were having like an anniversary of the designer, and so I
Mm,
was invited to of the architect, that is, I was invited to create a piece in their foyer, which was huge. I mean, it's like a 20-foot
mm,
ceiling.
mm,
So the piece, I was kind of inspired. It's going to sound really crazy, um, but it was kind of inspired by the building itself had been inspired by a building that had a dome. But
mm,
when the architect built it, he didn't build a dome because it was kind of like a modernist building. So I kind of used the idea that what if there had been a dome,
mm,
and, and the dome had fallen, flipped upside down,
mm,
and, and shattered.
mm,
And I use that as the starting point. So there were actually three kind of components. I built this in my studio. I had to rent a separate studio.
mm.
And I built it one piece at a time because
Okay.
these are, 18 feet tall.
Right.
Um, Transferred it to the space. And it was up for, I don't know, 2 or 3 months. So no, it was temporal.
Does it still exist? So it doesn't
No,
exist anymore?
no,
Just in
no. Like,
pieces.
what do you do with something that big, right?
What? You don't have the room?
No.
It's great. So I got a bunch of questions I want to ask you when I was coming across your work. So the first question, real simple. How long have you been making art?
A long time now.
Okay.
I mean, when do you start, right?
At
I
what
mean,
point did you realize that you were going to become an artist?
well, I decided I did not start my education thinking I was going to go into art. I backed into it. I started at Wesleyan University, and that was in the fall of 1976. And then I took drawing classes when I was there, and sculpture classes, and I just fell in love with it. And then I took a year off, and I just realized that I didn't. That's really where I wanted to spend my time.
Mm-hmm.
And then my parents felt that if I was going to truly, that's really what I wanted to do, I should go to art school.
Mm-hmm.
And so they encouraged me to apply to art school. And so I transferred to the Rhode Island School of Design, and graduated from there in 1982. So, when did I start really taking it seriously? Of course, in school.
Right.
But
Yeah.
in terms of, continuing, it's been continuous really ever since then.
So you're going to make something new. You're in the studio. You're feeling inspired. Is there anything in particular that since you've been making artwork for quite a while that is kind of a go-to for you in order to light that fire of creativity?
I've thought about this a lot because I think that one of the things that this was after that piece that you just showed at the Munson,
Hmm.
and I had worked almost 2 years on that piece, building this large, large structure and had to put everything into that one thing. And I'd worked with all these models and things like that. And at that point, I decided that I wanted to break down the process. And instead of putting all my eggs in one basket and doing this just one huge thing to make like 100
Hmm.
small 4 by 6, any piece would be no larger than
Hmm.
4 by 6 inches.
Hmm.
And I would
Hmm.
make 100 of these and just see where the process goes. I'd say, well, I'm going to do this for a year. Well,
Uh-huh.
the thing is, the year, and then I do another and another and another. And what I ended up doing is generating numerous, very distinct bodies of work. Some that really focus on the more formal aspects of my work that are really about geometry
Hmm.
and about the force of geometry and about volume and just stripped of all of its identity and its meaning in the sense of obvious meaning, but it has, of course, meaning, emotional meaning,
Hmm.
but doesn't have like, oh, yeah, that's a house, or I can see that's about,
Right.
transient. It doesn't have all the things that you can take with it, but really kind of thinking about kind of structures and
Mm.
structure of volume and structure of light, and then, applying that in larger spaces. And then other works that are just material, that are just more about like, well, where does the material
Yeah.
live?
So
Um,
do you find that changing your process on purpose helps ignite that creativity?
yeah, because I
Gives you a
think
challenge?
it's for me, I observe the process and so I make something and then I think about it and I like to have generate a lot of things and have them all out there at the same time. And one of the things I enjoy about working at a slightly smaller scale is I can have 10 things at the
Hmm.
same.
Right.
And so maybe I can't solve the problem in the one today, but maybe that one that I threw out, I thought it was over or done. It's like, oh, really, that wasn't that good. I can tear it up and
So
and redo it.
so while you're solving problems, I'm curious, does the idea of the viewer ever take precedence?
You,
No.
it's funny you should ask because my first really large works that I made
Uh-huh.
prior to the piece at Sculpture Space, they were all kind of environments, right?
Uh-huh.
And I didn't think about the viewer very much at all. I mean, I thought about it, but I was the viewer. I was both the
Right.
maker and the viewer, and I
Okay.
made it all in relationship to my own body. And I always found the viewer kind of like who asked them to come? It's like they would come in and
Hmm.
then would make the space seem small. It was like
Right.
all of a sudden something that was just right from my, I'm you can't tell, but I'm,
Right.
I'm
I got
5'3".
it. So if the viewer, this is the part two question, if the viewer doesn't really have that much influence on your creativity, would you consider your works to be autobiographical or not?
Oh, I don't know. That's an interesting question. I mean, only in a most abstract way, I
Hmm.
guess. I mean, I think pretty abstractly. So, is it about anything concrete in my life? No. But as I say, there's about tensions, between chaos and
Hmm.
order, between
Hmm.
trying to make sense of things, about vortexes, about things that are like moving.
Hmm.
And is it autobiographical? Probably because it's kind of who I am.
Hmm.
So,
But is that for the viewer to figure out?
yeah.
Yeah. So, time for just two more questions, and I had to get this one in. Um, have you, do you have a, I assume that you're always looking at new materials.
hmm
Are there any materials or disciplines that you've thought about that you haven't yet done that you'd like to explore?
You mean in terms of making?
Yeah. You know, are you going to take a left turn and start, doing a poetry book
Well,
or,
I would
uh,
do. I would love to do. Well, I have other things that I do like children's stories. I'm always
okay.
working on those on the side, but they're so different. They're so different.
Yeah, yeah,
The
yeah.
worlds don't meet. But I once applied for like a glass residency. I think it would be really fun to do like a
Yeah.
residency in a material that seems completely opposite to what I would that has
Yeah.
structures and restrictions that I wouldn't
I think
necessarily.
you would do well because I've done glass and I know there's similarities between glass and
Mm.
ceramics.
Yeah,
So I
yeah.
think you would fall into that really well. Time for my final question. Question I ask all artists: what does making art do for you?
It keeps me grounded.
Hmm.
It's so it's kind of, I don't know, just a very crucial part of my existence. And I'm always in my head, I'm always solving puzzles. And it allows me to see what the puzzles are.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, you make a puzzle, you make it, and it creates another puzzle, makes something else that I have to figure out. And I need to do that. I guess, who knows why?
Do you end up solving all your puzzles, or are there
No,
some?
no, it just
No,
creates
no.
more puzzles.
Yeah.
Right. The idea is that it's a story that doesn't end. It's a story that if you keep making it, it creates another possibility. It's about creating possibilities and potentials
Perfect.
and change.
Well, Anne, I can't thank you enough for talking with me today. Changed my
Thank you.
perspective on your work. I'm really, big fan to begin with, bigger fan now. So thank you very much for coming by and talking with me today. I also want to thank everybody who tuned in to watch Art Show today. We really love your support, especially if you can like and subscribe. That helps push Art Show out to more people. If you have any questions for Anne, you feel free to put them in the comments section and I'll pass them along. And thank you again for watching. And Anne, again, thank you so much. That was
Well, thank
wonderful.
you.
All right. Take care, everybody.
I